stepping into the world of American college. When I think back to my very first day at Willowbrook University in Colorado, it still feels like opening a brand new book. The pages crisp, the story unwritten, and my heart pounding louder than ever. I was 19, coming from a quiet suburb in Ohio. Suddenly, I was surrounded by mountain air, bustling dorm hallways, and an unfathomable sense of possibility. There's something about standing at the threshold of a new chapter, suitcase in hand, with nobody around who knows your middle name. That's both terrifying and exhilarating at once. Move-in day was a swirl of activity. Parents hauling boxes, students making awkward small talk, resident assistants cheerfully pointing out the laundry room. I met my roommate, Chloe, a quick-talking girl from Texas, who immediately started stringing fairy lights and unpacking about a dozen pairs of cowboy boots. I remember standing by my assigned bed, arms wrapped tightly around my backpack, trying to look casual, while my brain ran a mile a minute. Would I fit in? Would I actually make friends here? Or would everything I heard about finding your people be just a myth? The campus itself was gorgeous, a mix of stately old brick buildings and splashy new glass and steel science wings, framed by the Rockies rising in the distance. It felt like the world was inviting me to become anything I wanted to be. During orientation, I wandered the quad with a map clenched in my hand, caught between excitement over the information fair and a paralyzing fear I'd take the wrong path, literally and figuratively. I kept reminding myself, everyone else here is new too, but anxiety has a way of ignoring logic. My hands shook as I introduced myself during icebreakers, and I nearly spilled my coffee during my first campus tour. Yet, in those first few weeks, I learned to embrace the unknown. Meals in the dining hall became opportunities for accidental friendships. I met Katie, who played acoustic guitar and quoted Oscar Wilde. Julian, from Puerto Rico, who could recite movie trivia faster than anyone I'd met. And a boisterous group of engineering majors who adopted me after I crashed their lunch table out of pure desperation. There were awkward silences, sure, and plenty of moments when I felt like a puzzle piece scraped from the wrong box. But there was also laughter, pizza at midnight, and the slow realization that homesickness wasn't permanent. One thing that struck me about college in America was how everyone seemed to be reinventing themselves. I met girls who had been shy in high school, but joined debate teams, guys who dyed their hair blue just because they could, and transfer students who carried invisible wounds from their last campus, but still smiled at strangers. I tried out for the campus radio, even though public speaking made my stomach churn. I signed up for way too many clubs, most of which I'd later drop, hoping to find my place. Along the way, I discovered a capacity for adaptation I never knew I had. Each day was a small act of courage, attending a poetry slam solo, emailing a professor for the first time, raising my hand during a heated classroom discussion, and, floating through all that change, was my hope that one of the faces I passed on the quad would become a real friend, someone who would stick by me through stress and teary nights, who'd know my secrets and share in my laughter. I didn't know yet how complicated friendships could get, or that one friendship in particular would turn my world upside down. But as I lugged my backpack across campus and smiled at strangers, one thing was certain: my story here was just getting started. The friendship that seemed perfect. Looking back, I can still remember the first time I met Jessica Turner. It was during that first chaotic week of classes, when no one really knew anyone, and everyone was hungry for connection. We were in the campus coffee shop, waiting for our drinks, mine a shaky attempt at a cappuccino, hers a caramel latte. She was tall, with a wild mane of chestnut hair and a way of smiling that instantly put you at ease, like you'd known her since grade school. Before I knew it, we were chatting about everything from our favorite 90s rom-coms to our mutual dread of public speaking. By the end of that first week, it was as if Jess and I had always existed in each other's lives. She texted me every morning to make sure I didn't oversleep, and I started saving her a seat in intro psych. We explored every corner of campus together, from the creaky library stacks to the graffiti-filled tunnels, where upperclassmen dared freshmen to sneak adventurous selfies. Night after night, we'd collapse on beanbags in her dorm room, sharing confessions, embarrassing middle school crushes, the stuff we secretly loved about our families, the tiny insecurities we'd never admitted to anyone else. Jess had an energy that swept you up like a warm breeze. She was always the first to suggest movie nights, midnight ice cream runs, or spontaneous karaoke in the common room. If I was spiraling over a tough assignment, she'd joke until the tension cracked. Somehow, she made even the strangest, loneliest days feel like the start of something magical. I'd look at her across our cluttered table, half-eaten snacks, scattered textbooks, and feel, for the first time since moving here, like maybe this place could become home. Our little group grew around us. A couple of art majors, one quirky philosophy buff, and two future engineers who insisted on hosting waffle Sundays. Together, we carved out a pocket of laughter and shared playlists amid the waves of unfamiliarity. Jess remembered every birthday, every small detail I mentioned in passing. When my homesickness threatened to swallow me whole, she'd drag me outside to count shooting stars or blow off steam at the rec center. Sometimes, after a particularly rough day, she'd just sit quietly next to me, offering nothing but a reassuring presence and a well-timed cup of tea. From the outside looking in, I thought I'd landed the perfect college friendship. Loyal, understanding, and always effortlessly fun. There were no awkward silences with Jess, no second-guessing whether I belonged. The two of us became known as a matched set. Our names tumbled together in conversations. We finished each other's sentences, and people would joke that we shared a brain. I realize now there's a kind of comfort in believing you've finally found that one friend who gets you completely, especially when everything else in your world is upended. Maybe I clung a little too tightly to that feeling, wanting to trust it with a kind of blind faith. At least in those early weeks, with the city lights winking outside and the future sprawling ahead of us, Jess and I were inseparable, and I couldn't imagine college any other way. The first cracks. Looking back, I can pinpoint the first time something felt off between Rachel and me. It was midway through the spring semester, during the lead-up to a campus-wide speech competition I'd been obsessing over for weeks. I threw myself into research, pouring my heart into my draft, running through my speech with Rachel almost every night. She'd listen and smile, offer notes, and even test me with surprise questions like a supportive coach. I felt lucky, grateful, convinced she was my biggest cheerleader. After the competition, where I placed second, something I'd never dared hope for, I was on cloud 9. For the next few days, though, it seemed like Rachel was different. She was distant in our group chat, made excuses when I suggested hanging out, and only responded with a quick, "Congrats," when the news went around. I chalked it up to stress. Everyone had a heavy load as finals approached, but a small, unignorable seed of doubt landed in my chest. The tension only grew during a group project for our Psych 101 class. I partnered with Rachel and 2 others, thinking it'd make things easy. As the project progressed, Rachel would make little comments in front of our teammates. "You know, Alex is kind of a perfectionist. She won't settle for less," and sometimes seemed to take credit for my ideas when discussing the project with our professor. At first, I laughed it off, but after hearing from another teammate that Rachel had told the professor she steered the ship on our whole project, I started to second-guess everything. My suspicion grew after a weekend at the dorms. One Saturday, I arrived at our usual group brunch to find everyone talking in low tones, trailing off as I walked in. Katie, always the least subtle of our bunch, kept glancing between me and Rachel. Later that night, after a particularly awkward silence in the rec room, our friend Mason quietly told me, "I heard Rachel was saying, you only placed in the speech competition because of her notes." My face burned, embarrassment, shock, and the sting of betrayal blending together. I wanted to believe it was some misunderstanding, but after that, I started noticing more things. Suddenly, stories about me, things that could only have come from private conversations with Rachel, were circulating. Awkward interactions with my boyfriend, Nick, left me baffled until he confessed, "Rachel said you told her. You're not sure we're working out." I hadn't said anything even close to that. It was like waking up in someone else's story, seeing your own words twisted in someone else's mouth. The hardest part was questioning myself. Was I being paranoid? Was Rachel just joking? Or did she really resent my success? Sometimes she'd snap right back to being the perfect friend, inviting me to study, tagging me in inside jokes, bringing me snacks before my big biology midterm. I began to feel unsteady, like I was walking a well-polished floor, and never knew when I'd hit another slippery patch. I started withdrawing, just a little, second-guessing whether to share news or feelings, nervous about what might come boomeranging back to me in another's voice. I even found myself rehearsing my words before chatting in our group, alert to double meanings and stray remarks. A few weeks later, the lid finally blew off at a party. Our group was celebrating spring quarter's end at Katie's off-campus apartment. The music was loud, but I caught the tail end of Rachel telling 2 other friends I couldn't handle stress without falling apart, and should be glad anyone's helping me get through college. I couldn't decide what hurt more, the words themselves or the fact that, deep down, I hadn't been all that surprised. Walking home through the cool Oregon air that night, I realized the unspoken truth. Some friendships can look perfect on the outside, while quietly unraveling on the inside. It was the worst kind of heartbreak, because you lose your confidant along with your sense of trust. But there, under the street lamps and the hum of campus nightlife, I decided I had to do something. If not for revenge, then at least for my own self-respect. That was the night I decided. I wasn't going to just let it slide. I would find a way to bring the truth into the light, even if it meant risking what was left of our friendship, or rattling the certainty I'd found in my new world. The breaking point. It's strange how betrayal can be a quiet, creeping thing, showing up first as a whisper of doubt before finally roaring into undeniable reality. My friendship with Rachel, the girl who'd once been my backbone, had shifted from subtle discomfort to daily anxiety. Looking back, I realized that the actual breaking point didn't explode in a single dramatic instant. Rather, it was a slow, relentless erosion of trust, until one day, all that had been solid between us dissolved. The final straw came in the aftermath of that awful party at Katie's apartment. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, that maybe Rachel was just having a difficult semester, Or maybe I'd misunderstood her words through the thud of bass and the haze of too many half-finished conversations. But the days that followed were different. I found my messages to Rachel went unanswered, and our group text was suddenly minus the playful inside jokes we'd always shared. People avoided my gaze in the dining hall. Conversation stumbled whenever I entered the room. Something invisible and rotten was growing in the space between me and the circle of friends I'd come to rely on. At nights, insomnia gnawed at me. I'd lie awake, scrolling through old texts, sweet, silly conversations that now read like punchlines to some inside joke I no longer understood. My mind replayed every word, every exchange with Rachel, searching for signs I'd missed. When did her encouragement sour into envy? When did confiding my worries become ammunition for ridicule? I felt exposed, hyper-aware that the very person I'd trusted most had turned into my harshest skeptic. The confusion bled into everything. I stopped volunteering my ideas in class, afraid they'd be twisted, and hesitated before replying to group chats, always wondering who was reading my words without the context of our tangled history. I even avoided Nick, my boyfriend then, worried that Rachel's rumors had infected his trust in me. The smallest things set my nerves on edge. A skipped invitation to brunch, laughter dying out as I passed under the library arch, friends hugging each other just a little tighter, leaving me hovering on the outside. One evening, a week after the party, I ran into Mason near the campus mailboxes. He looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot, his gaze darting anywhere but towards mine. "Hey, Alex," he said, his voice low. "Listen, I think you should know. Rachel's been saying some stuff about you. She's telling people you made up stories to get sympathy, and that you used her for all your group projects." My stomach twisted. Mason's words, spoken kindly, but with a finality I couldn't ignore, fractured whatever was left of my denial. I remember thanking him, my voice shaky with effort, then fleeing to my dorm. The walls felt closer than ever, my tiny bed suddenly the only safe place in a campus that now felt hostile. That night, as rain tapped at my window, I realized I couldn't let this slide, not just for me, but because I didn't want anyone else twisting in the same storm of uncertainty and self-doubt. What hurt the most wasn't losing Rachel's friendship. It was losing the version of myself I'd been when I believed someone could see all my worst days and still choose loyalty. I mourned the slow, poisoned unraveling of trust, but the sadness eventually congealed into something sharper. Resolve. I pulled out my old blue notebook, the one I used to fill with poetry and secret dreams, and started jotting down everything I remembered, every conversation that felt wrong, each warped story that made its way back to me, all the moments when Rachel's smile didn't reach her eyes. I combed through messages, collecting proof, screenshots of our exchanges, voice memos, snapshots of group chats where Rachel's duplicity poked through like threads, unraveling from a favorite sweater. But this wasn't enough. Words, especially mine, could be spun, twisted, denied. I needed something undeniable. My heart raced as I remembered the party. Rachel talking with Liz and Ben, her voice sharp, her laughter edged. I'd stumbled in just as she'd launched into complaints about me, capturing part of her tirade on my phone, at first out of confusion, then, as she went on, out of necessity. I'd never intended to weaponize that recording, but now it was a tiny lifeline, tethering me to the truth. I spent the next few days mulling over what to do. Should I confront Rachel privately, risking another wave of manipulation and gaslighting, Go to a faculty advisor and drag college bureaucracy into this mess? Or trust in the very friends whose silence had deepened my sense of betrayal? Each option felt like walking a tightrope above a pit of second-guessing and self-reproach. Days blurred into one another, every interaction with our group tinged with suspicion. When they planned a birthday party for Katie, something Rachel usually organized, I felt the bitter tang of exclusion, but also a strange sense of relief. It was the sign I needed. Whatever threads had bound us were already fraying beyond repair. If Rachel could create a narrative about me, I could at least counter with the truth. Building my case felt at once empowering and nauseating. Gathering each scrap of evidence, double-checking every detail, I relived the microaggressions and manipulations, at times wanting desperately to just shut my laptop and let it all disappear. But the anger, mixed with humiliation, kept me going. I reached out cautiously to others on the periphery of our group, asking vague, open-ended questions. Their answers, hesitant, carefully worded, confirmed my suspicions. The story had spread, and all roads led back to Rachel. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and hardly recognized myself. My eyes were ringed with exhaustion. My voice, usually upbeat and enthusiastic, sounded wary and subdued. I was tense even around my roommate, Sophie, who'd always been blissfully outside of our group's drama. She started inviting me out for coffee, sensing I needed an escape, and I finally spilled the timeline of my heartbreak and scheme. Instead of recoiling, Sophie said, "You deserve to be heard, Alex. You owe it to yourself and to future you, the one who gets to love her life here." Her solidarity became a tiny patch of sunlight in my otherwise cloudy days. With Sophie's encouragement, my resolve firmed. I'd been the subject of enough whispers and sideways glances. I was done hiding. The campus party for Katie's birthday arrived. A classic college scene. Music thumping, strings of fairy lights glowing, red cups littering every available surface, and friends grouped by old alliances, old hurts. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, hugging the playlist, waiting for my moment. Before anyone began the speech or cut the cake, I slipped away with my phone and opened the live stream. My hand shook so badly, I had to prop my elbow on the windowsill to keep from dropping the phone. I started to speak, my voice cracking, then steadying. "Hey everyone, I have something I need to share. Something that's been festering for months. The next minutes are a fever dream in my memory." I played the segment of audio from the party, where Rachel's voice, unmistakable, laced my name with contempt and rehashed all the things she'd done for me. I scrolled through the screenshots, showing not only her words, but their context, and shared my version, not as an attack, but as my story. As the live stream rolled on, I watched the comments fly by, from people in the room and those watching from their dorms. Shock, disbelief, then support and anger. Questions for Rachel I'd never dared to ask out loud. Somewhere between the adrenaline and the fear, I felt a lightness bloom in my chest. For the first time in months, I was reclaiming my narrative, not as the target, but as someone brave enough to lay bare the truth, come what may. There was no dramatic confrontation in the living room, no reality TV screaming match. Instead, there was a ripple of silence, faces turning from Rachel to me, friends pausing mid-sentence as they processed what they'd just seen and heard. Rachel's face, a mask of disbelief and horror, lingers vividly in my mind. She tried to protest, her words tangling together. But this time, few were willing to listen. The ones who had started to doubt me now saw the evidence. the ones who'd never been sure where to stand, quietly drifted toward my side. Katie's eyes filled with tears. Ben handed me a cup of water and whispered, "I'm so sorry. I should have known." The aftermath was messy. Some people tried to mediate. Others just left, shell-shocked and quiet. Rachel slipped out before the night ended, her silhouette flickering in the glow of the porch lights as she disappeared into the dark campus streets. But for me, the air had changed. I could breathe again. In the days that followed, support poured in. Private messages from classmates, old friends, even strangers who'd seen the live stream. The cloud that had hovered over me in the weeks before lifted, bit by bit. There were awkward moments, yes. People weren't sure how to talk to me or what to say about Rachel. But the coldness and suspicion that had poisoned so many days was gone. I learned that sometimes the only way to create peace is to shake the whole system. My circle would never be the same again, but I was no longer afraid of being alone, because the truth had given me back my voice. That night, with the weight of months pressing down on me, I found the courage I'd thought I'd lost. Rachel's betrayal didn't define my college experience. The aftermath didn't either. What did, though, was the moment I stopped waiting for someone else to save me and decided to speak up for myself, no matter how much my hands shook or my voice trembled. In the quiet that followed the party, for the first time in a long while, I fell asleep with a calm heart. Looking back now, I know that was the night everything changed, not just between me and Rachel, but within myself, the night I learned that standing up for the truth, even when you're terrified, is the ultimate act of self-respect. The plan to expose the truth. After all the silent blows in sleepless nights, I finally reached a point where bottling up my pain was no longer an option. The feeling wasn't anger. It was something rawer, like the ache left by a bruise that won't fade. I remember sitting on my bed late one night, laptop open, spreadsheets forgotten, listening to the rain pelt my dorm window. I stared at my phone, scrolling through fragments of messages and audio clips stored like secret ammunition. A question kept repeating in my mind. How can I make them see what's really been going on? How do I reclaim my name and my truth without stooping to the same backstabbing games that had been used against me? The answer came less from a movie-worthy moment of insight and more from days of simmering and self-doubt. At first, I considered simply confronting Lauren in private. Just the two of us, with no audience, no safety nets. But I knew her too well by now. She would twist my words, deliver those perfectly rehearsed tears, and walk away with the sympathy of our friends. The thought stung bitterly, and I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. Lauren's manipulation was a poison seeping into our entire group, and it needed to be stopped before it broke anyone else. So, that's how the plan formed. Hesitant, shaky at first, and then brick by brick, transforming into something I could hold on to. I decided to share everything, not by whispers behind closed doors, but right in the open. I wanted transparency, brutal as it might be. If I was going to stand up for myself, it had to be public. It had to be undeniable. The most logical time, I realized, was during our annual group celebration, Mason's birthday bash. It had become a bit of a legend in our friend group over the years. Everyone would be there, surrounded by balloons and the smell of cheap pizza, speakers blasting throwback playlists, fairy lights strung across the ceiling. I knew if I waited for some quieter day, people might brush it off as drama. But an audience, altogether, people tend to listen when tension thickens. The air like honey. I spent the week leading up to the party, sifting through every morsel of evidence I had. There were texts, screenshots of language so snarky, so subtly cruel, I almost recoiled from my own phone. There were voice recordings, Lauren venting to others about how useless I was, or claiming credit for projects she barely touched. Then, the kicker, the audio from the night she thought I was out of earshot, methodically tearing me down before a crowd. For every piece, I forced myself to remember, not just the words, but the moments, the light in the room, how my stomach dropped, the way she never once saw the damage she left in her wake. I also made a list of everyone involved, who'd been present for which blow-up, who'd heard rumors from Lauren versus directly from me. I didn't want to make the mistake of confronting an entire room when only some had truly taken her side. I asked Sophie, my roommate, to sit with me every night while I organized everything. Her presence kept me grounded. She would shake her head in disbelief, let out the occasional curse word, and then brew us both a mug of chamomile tea. Sometimes, I thought she looked as heartbroken as I felt. "You've got to show them," she kept telling me. "But only if it's what you really want. Don't just do it to get even. Do it to set yourself free." The morning of the party, my stomach churned with nervous energy. I rehearsed what I'd say, then promptly forgot it all, then started again, scribbling an outline in the margins of my psych textbook. No matter how many times I mentally mapped the night, my hands kept shaking. Deep inside, there was a grain of guilt. What if I upended the last shreds of my group? What if people refused to believe me? What if, despite everything, Lauren found a way to play the victim, and I got blamed for stirring the pot? But I also knew there was no going back. Months of self-doubt had nearly broken me. I was tired of walking around campus, feeling like a ghost, scared of whispers, afraid to share joy over any achievement, lest it be twisted into arrogance. It was time to give myself a little dignity back, even if it meant starting from scratch. When it was finally time, I slipped my phone into the back pocket of my jeans, clutching it like a lifeline. I let Sophie know what I was about to do. She hugged me hard and said, "You got this, Sarah. You're braver than you realize." I watched my reflection in her eyes for a moment, my face pale, jaw set, pupils wide with fear. But she wasn't wrong. I'd never felt less safe. But maybe that was the point. Maybe vulnerability, in this case, was courage in disguise. The party itself was textbook college. Mason's apartment buzzed with energy and noise. Friends crowded the living room, arguing over which streaming playlist to queue up next, picking through a morass of snacks, laughing in waves that ricocheted off the walls. Lauren was there, of course, holding court, not quite looking at me, but still pretending nothing in the world could disrupt her happiness. I caught glimpses of the people who'd once been my safe haven. Ben, Liz, Maya, Claire. Their faces flickered with the familiar blend of concern and exhaustion that comes from too many months of friendship drama bubbling just beneath the surface. It took every ounce of willpower I had not to bolt. My skin crawled as I imagined what was about to happen. My rehearsed speech vanished from memory the second I saw Lauren across the room, tossing her hair and smiling her signature perfect smile, one she'd practiced in front of cameras and mirrors and now seemed to wear like armor. But then the moment arrived. Mason called for a group toast. Everyone clustered up, drinks raised, camera phones out. It was my cue. I nodded to Sophie. She squeezed my shoulder, her lips twitching in a nervous grin. I took a trembling breath and slipped open my phone, launching the live stream. It felt like the room got suddenly smaller. All those eyes, all those memories, pressing in on me. But I held on, voice shaking just enough to betray the effort it took. "Hey, I began, my words somehow louder than the pop music thumping in the background. I need everyone to listen for a sec. I know this isn't the vibe you planned for tonight, but there's something I need to say, and I need to say it in front of everyone. Some people exchanged glances. Others peered at their phones, watching as the notification for my live video lit up their screens. Lauren froze, her smile faltering as the focus shifted her way. I almost faltered myself, but Sophie's hand on my back reminded me that I wasn't alone. Not anymore. I started by explaining the misunderstandings, the weight I'd carried, the way rumors had morphed into truths no one bothered checking. I played the first audio file, Lauren's voice, dripping with contempt as she discussed me with Ben and Liz, assuring them that she'd practically done my work for every group grade I'd ever gotten. The room went so quiet, I could hear the fluff of the old couch cushions as someone fidgeted. Then I flashed up screenshots of our texts. My words, taken out of context and spun into gossip. My anxieties, mocked in group chats I'd never been invited to. Finally, I played the last piece. The clip of Lauren at the party last month, weaponizing every confidence I'd ever given her, laughing at my expense, her words echoed and unedited. I didn't bother accusing, and I didn't beg. I just let the evidence speak, let my voice crack once, but refused to apologize for it. My words felt like a dam breaking. I talked about how I'd doubted myself, how I'd struggled to believe in my own worth, and how I'd finally realized the only way to stop being a target was to stop hiding. If you ever cared about me, even once, I said, just listen to this with your heart, not just your ears. This isn't about revenge. It's about truth. I've spent too much time being afraid. I won't do it anymore. The reaction was overwhelming. People stared at Lauren, not with anger yet, but with a mix of confusion, betrayal, and disbelief. Lauren opened her mouth to respond, words catching. Another story brewing behind her eyes. But this time, the thread snapped. Ben confronted her, voice shaking. Is this true, Lauren? Others chimed in, asking for explanations, suddenly taking my side, at least with their uncertainty. The room that once felt so hostile was now charged with possibility, of justice, of resolution, of new beginnings. I didn't stick around for the fallout. I hugged Sophie, thanked the friends who quietly offered their support, then slipped out into the hallway, heart hammering, the air suddenly clearer. My phone buzzed in my pocket as notifications poured in, some outraged, some apologetic, some simply saying, "Thank you for telling us." It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't painless. The group would never be the same. But as I walked out into the crisp Colorado night, I felt lighter than I had in a long, long time. My story was messy, but at least it was finally, truly my own. The friends who did a 180. If someone told me at the start of college that my core friend group would dissolve overnight, I would have laughed them off. We were the ride or die kind, or so I'd believed. The night I exposed Lauren's lies, everything shifted. My phone kept buzzing with messages as the aftershocks rippled across the campus. But what followed was nothing like the drama-filled scenes I'd built up in my anxious mind. No massive confrontation, no shouted accusations echoing down the dorm hallway. Instead, the change crept in quietly, day by day. At first, the entire group seemed frozen. No one knew whether to text me, ask for the whole side of what happened, or pretend nothing at all had occurred. The morning after Mason's party, I wandered into the dining hall with Sophie and saw a dozen familiar faces scattered across 3 different tables. For months, those dinners had been my anchor, packed with laughter, banter, and plans for the next adventure. Now, our group had split into uneasy factions. Some friends were instantly outraged. At Lauren, at themselves, and embarrassingly, at me for making it public. Natalie, one of my closest confidants, sent a single line. "I wish you'd said something sooner." Her words stung. The implication was as clear as the Colorado sunrise. If I'd spoken up earlier, maybe I could have prevented this. But as much as I tried to draft explanations, "You weren't living in my head," always sounded like a cop-out. Other friends, those I'd trusted less, whose loyalty had often felt conditional, pivoted toward Lauren. At least for a while, they posted muted Instagram stories, referencing forgiveness and drama magnets. It was obvious who believed Lauren's version, that I'd blown everything out of proportion. But for the first time, I didn't feel the knee-jerk need to defend myself to them. What surprised me most was how the weakest connections floated quietly away, like leaves in autumn wind. The people who always hung at the edges of our group, joining us for late-night cramming or tagging along to festivals, disappeared without a word. No explanation necessary, just a soft fade into the sprawling anonymity of college life. I realized I'd spent so much energy trying to make everyone like me, to maintain this image of a perfect friend group, that I'd never noticed how many of those friendships were as thin as tissue paper. The most painful fallout, though, came from the ones I considered found family. Ben texted me a few days later. "I honestly don't know who to believe anymore. This is too much." I called him, my hands shaky, desperate for the connection we once had. Our conversation was awkward, littered with apologies and half-finished sentences. There was no real closure, just a mutual exhaustion. For weeks after, we barely spoke. For several days, campus felt like a minefield. In classes, I'd catch glimpses of old friends, their eyes sliding past me without a nod. The group chat that had once been my social home exploded into silence. Study sessions were awkward, as people tiptoed around the elephant in the room. The few who reached out tended to DM late at night, when public opinion felt less risky. Honestly, I always sided with you, but it's hard to know what to do now. Or, "I hope you don't hate me for not backing you up before." Their uncertainty, while understandable, hurt more than I'd anticipated. But for all the chilly silences, there were also glimmers of warmth. Katie, the one who'd always memorized everyone's birthdays, became a lifeline. She texted me simply, "Hey, want to escape to the mountains this weekend?" We drove for hours, winding through golden aspen and cool pines, and talked about everything but Lauren, until the need to process spilled out in slow trickles. For the first time since the fallout, I felt seen, unconditionally. Sophie, my roommate, proved to be the best friend I never knew I needed. She made our tiny dorm room a safe space, peppered me with memes when the mood was heavy, and invited a quiet parade of misfit classmates, people orbiting outside all the drama, to join us for dinner, game nights, and afternoons sprawled on the quad. I started making new friends, ones who knew me for who I was in the aftermath of chaos, not just from the highlight reel of freshman year fun. There were nights when loneliness bit hard. I missed the simplicity of before, when I thought I belonged to a tight-knit tribe, untouchable by the messiness that seemed to sweep up other college students. Now, even the air felt sharper, and my laughter sometimes caught in my throat. Self-doubt kept me company. Maybe I'd ruined everything. Maybe I should have kept quiet. Maybe Lauren had a point, and I was the common denominator all along. But those thoughts, though persistent, began to lose their power over time. Conversations with campus counselors helped more than I expected. I started to untangle the difference between being liked and being respected, between loneliness and true isolation. I learned to value the solidarity of a few over the applause of many. I found deep comfort in the slow rekindling of connections with friends who took time, sometimes weeks, to process what had happened before returning with tentative warmth. "I'm sorry I doubted you," Ben said, months after the party. He brought coffee, and in the awkward silence between us, I recognized genuine remorse and the hope for something new. My group didn't return in the same form. The old text thread never revived. People formed subgroups, some drifting back my way in ones and twos, others aligning themselves elsewhere, or with Lauren, who seemed to shrink behind her own wall of supporters, her smiles never quite touching her eyes anymore. The social order reset, not with a bang, but with small course corrections. A quiet lunch here, a supportive word there, cautious but honest friendships growing in place of the old clique. Over time, I stopped needing everyone to like me. I became more selective about who I poured my time and trust into, treasuring depth over the comfort of numbers. My understanding of friendship evolved from something I boasted about on social media to something I protected in the quiet hours of real life. When I walked across campus now, I felt lighter, freer from the anxieties of belonging. I also saw the ways that truth, once spoken, had ripple effects no one could have predicted. A freshman who'd watched the live stream found me after class one day and thanked me for saying what we've all felt about fake friends. Upperclassmen whom I'd barely exchanged words with nodded in solidarity. For every relationship that ended, at least one honest connection rose up to take its place. Proof that starting over, though lonely, was a kind of quiet liberation. Sometimes I still ached for what I'd lost. Nostalgia played tricks. The late-night pizza runs, the group volunteering projects, the feeling of walking into a room and knowing you belonged. But I also recognize those memories for what they were, moments brimming with hope, but fragile beneath their surface. The friends who did a 180, the ones who pulled away, doubted, or simply drifted, no longer felt like an indictment of me. Instead, they were a natural shedding, as necessary as shedding a too tight skin. If my old group was a pageant of surface alliances, my new tribe felt like a sanctuary. We were smaller, quieter, but infinitely more real. There was no pressure to perform, no careful curation of drama-free perfection. We could talk about anxiety and heartbreak and the awkward way people change, without fear of it being turned into gossip. For every wound Lauren had left, I found a scar that healed over with truth and time. By the end of sophomore year, the saga of that party faded into campus legend. Replaced by new stories and fresh drama, I watched with a little more detachment and a lot more wisdom. The friends who turned on me barely registered as villains anymore. They were just kids, stumbling their way through the same confusion and insecurity that had tripped me up. I wasn't bitter. I was grateful, in a way, for the clarity their actions brought. In the end, what mattered wasn't how many people circled my table in the dining hall, but how fiercely the ones who remained supported me through the worst days of my college life. The friends I made after the storm, Sophie, Katie, and a handful of new confidants, showed me how connection could look: quiet, enduring, and deeply true. My faith in friendship wasn't broken. It was just rebuilt, shakier at first, but in the end, stronger than I'd ever imagined. The value of truth. If you had told me years ago that one of the most important lessons I would learn in college wasn't tied to a classroom, a textbook, or even a life-changing lecture, but instead to a messy explosion of friend drama. I'd have rolled my eyes and probably made a sarcastic joke. But now, having survived the firestorm of betrayal, exclusion, and all the shaky confrontations, I can see just how deeply those lessons burn themselves into my heart. The thing about telling the truth is that it's nowhere near as easy or tidy as they make it sound in self-help books or graduation speeches. Those polished stories always seem to glide from painful honesty to instant respect, like all you have to do is stand up for yourself, and the world will bend to your courage. But it's rarely like that in real life. My truth didn't fall gently into a receptive crowd. It landed with a thud, splitting old friendships and forcing everyone, myself included, to finally choose where they stood. And yet, I can see now, with the clarity of distance, that speaking up was the single most valuable thing I could have done. The aftermath wasn't heroic. It was awkward, uncomfortable, and at times, straight up lonely. While some reached out with apologies, relieved that someone had finally shattered the silence, others just faded into the background and left me to sweep up my own debris. I spent many nights wondering whether honesty was truly worth the cost. In missed invitations, in friends who never texted back, in moments when the dining hall felt like a stadium of turned backs and hushed whispers. Sometimes, the truth felt less like a weapon and more like a suit of armor, heavy to wear, protecting me mostly from my own regret. But day by day, that heaviness changed. When you finally stop hiding from what hurts, you find little pockets of freedom you'd almost forgotten existed. There's relief in no longer tiptoeing around your own voice, no longer scrambling to keep your story straight. I discovered new friends and old acquaintances who told me, quietly, that what I did gave them courage, too. They'd been the silent witnesses to their own versions of gossip and bullying, and somehow my courage became permission for them to stand their ground, too. I won't sugarcoat it. Rebuilding your identity after a public fallout is rough. It messes with your sense of who you are, with what you're willing to risk, with how loudly you want to speak up in the future. There were days when I missed the ease of my old group, the quick inside jokes, the unspoken sense of belonging, the comfort of always having someone to sit with on the quad. Nostalgia is sticky that way. It makes you long for toes that never really fit the shoes they wore. And yet, looking back, that version of belonging was always on borrowed time. The cost was silencing myself, flattening my concerns for the sake of some false peace. I realized that peace built on secrets and half-truths is never solid. It shatters at the first real tremor, and when it does, you're left scrambling to remember what your own voice actually sounds like. Telling the truth forced me to get reacquainted with my own boundaries. I started questioning which parts of myself I'd been shrinking to fit other people's comfort zones. What did I want out of my friendships? Could I trust someone again? Or would I flinch every time I handed over a secret? For a while, trust was a tentative thing. I doubted the motives behind kind gestures, second-guessed the warmth in every new connection. It took time, but slowly, patience and honesty from a handful of friends allowed me to rebuild the shaky scaffolding of trust in something real again. I found unexpected joy in the smaller, quieter friendships that formed after the storm. We shared fewer photos online, but had deeper, messier conversations in person. I started to notice compassion in new places, in the way a professor lingered after class to check in, or an acquaintance I barely knew dropped me a note saying, "I'm proud of you." These connections, though fewer, felt stronger than the numbers ever did. Over time, I started to see truth as less of a single moment, a mic drop in a crowded living room, and more as a daily practice, choosing not to gossip, refusing to sugarcoat my needs, being upfront about my boundaries, even when it felt scary. The shock of exposing Lauren's lies transformed how I carried myself everywhere. I realized I could be brave even when I was shaking. Other unexpected things happened, too. My academic life improved. Without the stress of a toxic friend group, I focused more easily. My grades went up, and I became more engaged in the clubs and organizations I truly cared about, not just the ones my old friends valued. I signed up for volunteer opportunities I'd always postponed, and discovered a talent for leadership that had once been hidden under the weight of others' opinions. It felt like clearing away brambles to finally see the path in front of me. But not everything changed so neatly. I still had moments of doubt, especially late at night when the world seemed quiet and regret creeped in. Sometimes I'd replay the party in my head, wondering what would be different if I just put on a smile and let it all slide. Maybe things would have been easier, but I can say with certainty they would never have been true. It surprised me how healing it was to talk things through with others who'd faced similar betrayals. On campus, I found a few familiar faces who'd gone through their own friendship earthquakes. Over coffee or on long walks under the changing leaves, we swapped stories, sometimes with tears, sometimes with gallows humor. There was comfort in owning the mess, of saying out loud, "Yeah, I got hurt, but I'm still standing." We relied on each other to rebuild a new vision of community, one rooted in shared vulnerability, not just shared interests. Maybe most important of all, I learned that happiness isn't found in being universally liked or in smoothing over tension at all costs. It was in standing tall, refusing to let my spirit be defined by someone else's version of my character. I stopped pouring energy into winning over people who would weaponize my words. Instead, I invested in the friends who showed up, checked in, and told their own truths right back. Looking back now, I realize the process of making peace with the past, of actually forgiving, if not forgetting, wasn't about Lauren or the people who doubted me. It was about me. I had to forgive myself for not seeing the warnings sooner, for the times I let others trample my boundaries, for staying silent when I knew deep down that something was wrong. I had to trust that speaking up, even imperfectly, was an act of self-love instead of self-sabotage. College kept moving forward. Seasons changed. Drama faded. New rumors rose and fell. Life, as life always does, filled in the empty spaces with new challenges and sweeter beginnings. In time, people stopped asking about that party. Even Lauren became just another familiar face, seen at a distance, someone I'd once trusted, now simply a fragment of a much bigger story. The pain dulled, and in its place, a kind of quiet pride took root. I'd survived the unraveling. I'd chosen myself. The most unexpected outcome, I became someone my freshman self would hardly recognize. Not harder, necessarily, but stronger. Not perfectly forgiving, but much less afraid of confrontation or discomfort. I still love deeply, still care maybe too much about the people close to me. But now I understand that love is healthiest when it springs from honest ground. I don't regret what happened anymore. I see it as a rite of passage, my own initiation into what becoming an adult actually means. There are days when old insecurities resurface, the urge to please, to coast on the smooth surface instead of swimming into the deep. But every time I remember the night I took back my story and spoke my truth, I find the courage to choose authenticity all over again. I'm not immune to heartbreak, but I'm also not afraid to risk vulnerability for the sake of genuine connection. By now, the truth is less about what happened between me and Lauren and more about how I choose to live every single day. When new friends drift into my life, I don't hide my history. If anything, I share it when it feels right, as a gentle warning and an invitation. Here's what hurt. Here's how I healed. And here's what I expect in return. The people who stick around are the ones who understand that honesty isn't always pretty, but it's always better than walking on eggshells. The best part about surviving a conflict like that is the freedom it gives you to speak up, to walk away from what doesn't serve you, to ask for support when you need it, and sometimes to just sit with yourself and know you did the right thing, even if it wasn't the easy thing. And so, if I could send a letter to that lost, scared version of myself, the girl worrying that standing up for herself might be her downfall, I'd say, thank you for choosing truth. Thank you for believing you deserve better. Thank you for trusting that the mess of honesty is 1,000 times better than the comfort of a lie. And above all, thank you for lighting a path that I still walk every day, a little braver, a little brighter, with every step.